Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
All right, let's dive right in because today we are wrestling with, well, one of the biggest, most fascinating questions out there. What makes some people exceptionally brilliant? What's the deal with genius, creativity, and all those incredible cognitive abilities? Are you just born with it, or is it something you build?
It really is the age-old debate, isn't it? And our stack of sources today, it really leans into the complexity of it all. It's not simple.
Absolutely. We've pulled together a bunch of different perspectives, articles, research notes, some transcripts, looking at everything from the basic building blocks like thought and attention.
Yeah, the fundamentals.
To the wild cases of child prodigies and savants, that big nature-nurture tug-of-war, the role of practice, what creativity actually is, and how to get more of it. And even some surprising habits of people who really change the world.
Our goal really is to try and pull out the core insights from all this material, see how these different pieces might fit together, and maybe understand a little better what goes into, well, human potential.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And trust me, the sources threw up some real head-scratchers. We're going to explore how someone like Mozart could seemingly just hear symphonies in his head.
Right.
Why some incredibly famous, brilliant people actually struggled in school, whether there's really a link between creativity and mental health. That's a tricky one.
Always is.
And even how leaving your lab a complete mess might accidentally lead to a Nobel Prize.
Intriguing connections, definitely.
Okay, let's start by getting grounded. Before we tackle the truly exceptional, our sources touch on the fundamental stuff. Cognitive processes and cognitive skills. What's the difference, and why does it matter for, understanding the rest?
That's a great starting point. Think of cognitive processes as the brain's basic engine, the core operations it performs. The sources highlight a couple that are particularly key.
Okay.
There's thought, which is fundamental to making decisions, figuring things out, solving problems, all that higher level reasoning we do.
The internal processing, basically.
Right. And then there's attention. That's your ability to focus. How well you can concentrate really impacts things like memory. The sources note a strong link between good attention and better short and long-term recall.
Okay, so processes are the engine. What are cognitive skills then? Are they like the tools you build with that engine?
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. Cognitive skills use those basic processes to perform tasks effectively, things like learning, decision-making, problem-solving.
Wow.
And here's a key takeaway from the sources, and it's quite encouraging. While the processes are fundamental, the skills built on them are something you can actually improve. They get sharper with practice.
That is encouraging. Practice actually makes your brain skills better. Which specific skill did the sources point to as particularly important?
Critical thinking comes up quite a bit. It's the ability to look at information, evaluate it logically, analyze situations, and find solutions, especially ones that aren't immediately obvious.
So it's not just about taking information in, but how you process it, question it, use it to solve problems, like trying to figure out if something you read online is actually true. That's critical thinking.
Exactly. It's a vital skill for navigating, well, pretty much everything these days.
Okay. Moving from those building blocks, let's look at the people who seem to use them in extraordinary ways. Our sources throw around terms like talent, child prodigy, savant, and genius. How do we sort out the differences? They can seem a bit jumbled.
Yeah, they can. But the sources give us some really useful distinctions. Arthur Schopenhauer's analogy is fantastic, actually. He said talent is hitting a target no one else can hit.
Okay.
But genius is hitting a target no one else can see.
Ooh, I like that. Talent is being uniquely good at what's already recognized, while genius spots something entirely new, something hidden.
Precisely. Talent operates in the evident world. Genius sees the hidden potential. Steve Jobs had a similar perspective, didn't he? He noted that people often don't know what they want until you show it to them. The genius identifies that need or possibility others haven't perceived yet.
Okay, that clarifies talent versus genius nicely.
Yeah.
What about child prodigies? We've all heard stories, kids playing complex music or doing advanced math when they're tiny.
Right. A child prodigy, based on the sources, is someone who shows exceptional ability or talent at a very young age, typically in a specific domain like music or math. Think of figures like Alma Deutscher today, or the young Mozart and his sister Nannerl, or even Picasso early on. They often display advanced cognitive skills and this really intense drive. One source called it a high rage to master, just this burning need to get good at that thing.
And savants are different again.
Yes, quite distinct. Savants are individuals, often with developed developmental disorders and sometimes lower overall IQs, though not always that's important, who possessed truly extraordinary abilities, but in very narrow, specific areas.
Like Kim Peek.
Kim Peek, exactly. The man who inspired Rain Man. He's a prime example discussed. And what's fascinating there is his ability wasn't just rote memorization initially. The sources note it actually developed into comprehension and even creative application later on.
Really?
Yeah, which challenges that idea of just verbal adhesion, memory without understanding, like having a kiln full of bricks but no idea how to build anything with them. Savant syndrome also seems more common in males, and there might be links to how the left hemisphere of the brain develops or gets damaged.
Wow. That's fascinating how specific those abilities can be. And then there's the big one, genius. Is that just having a super high IQ score? Is that what the sources say?
No, actually, the sources are quite clear that it's not just about IQ. Genius, in the sense of having a transformative impact, is measured by accomplishment, not just a test score.
Okay.
Think of Leonardo da Vinci or Shakespeare, and consider people like Darwin, Churchill, Edison, even Einstein early on, Steve Jobs, Jack Ma, Beethoven, Picasso. Many of them had academic struggles or didn't ace tests.
Right. You hear those stories.
Yeah. Louis Terman, who developed the Stanford-Binet IQ test, actually stopped using genius as just an IQ classification because it didn't capture the whole picture. Genius, as the writer Nabokov put it, seems to be about seeing invisible links between things.
Okay, so genius is about impact, seeing connections, not just raw processing speed. This naturally leads us to that fundamental question our sources explore. Is exceptional ability primarily about nature, what you're born with, or nurture, how you're raised and developed?
Well, the overwhelming perspective from the sources is that it's really a product of both nature and nurture, constantly interacting. It's not either. It's always both. It's a dance between them.
What do the sources say about the nature side? Is there a genetic component we can point to?
Absolutely. Figures like Francis Galton and Cyril Burt argued strongly for heredity influencing eminent acumen and intelligence being an innate general cognitive ability. The sources discuss giftedness as having a potential basis in genetics. They suggest that children with this, let's call it innate potential, might find learning itself intrinsically rewarding. And that feeling, that reward, motivates them to spend those hundreds or thousands of hours focusing on a subject. Some sources even touch on potential genetic links to certain mental traits, like in the Van Gogh family history, for instance.
So genetics might provide a predisposition or like a potential starting point.
Exactly. A blueprint, maybe. But the environment nurture is where that potential gets shaped or maybe even activated. The sources really emphasize that the environment impacts brain development right from birth.
How so?
Well, it's like the environment tells your genes how and when to express themselves. It can shape or even silence certain genetic directions. Early relationships, early experiences are absolutely vital. They either support healthy development or they can inhibit it.
Can you give us some concrete examples of those environmental factors from the sources? What kinds of things make a difference?
Certainly. The resources parents provide, both educational and psychosocial, are highlighted as crucial. They act as a kind of channel, influencing cognitive function based on experiences and both parent and child tendencies.
Okay.
The home environment itself is seen as particularly critical, especially in challenging circumstances like poverty. It can act as a protective factor against some negative health and socioeconomic impacts.
That makes sense.
And perhaps unsurprisingly, socioeconomic status itself is strongly correlated with academic and emotional development, with those gaps often appearing very early in life. High-quality early years education and care are seen as really beneficial, especially for children from low-income backgrounds. They improve outcomes and can potentially strengthen family bonds, too.
Yeah.
Even basic things like nutrition, breastfeeding, as mentioned, are essential for early brain development. And of course, broader cultural and social influences shape how kids think, behave, and develop. Parenting styles, for example, vary hugely across cultures.
Wow, that's a lot of different environmental factors interacting.
Yeah.
So you have this genetic potential and then this complex environmental shaping. Where does effort and practice fit into all this? Is it just about unleashing something innate, or is it building something?
Effort and practice are absolutely central to developing abilities, according to the sources. They discuss deliberate practice, a concept popularized by researchers like Anders Ericsson.
Right, I've heard of that.
And this isn't just, noodling around on the guitar for hours. It's structured activity specifically designed to improve performance, often pushing you just beyond your current comfort zone. The story of Laszlo Polgar raising his daughters to be chess champions is often brought up here.
But I remember hearing there's a bit of debate about whether all expert performance is simply down to, like, 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. Is it really that simple?
You're right, that debate is definitely covered in the sources.
Mm.
A large meta-analysis by McNamara and colleagues looked across many fields: games, music, sports, education, professions.
Mm-hmm.
And they found that deliberate practice explained varying amounts of the difference in performance. Around 26% in music and games, 18% in sports, but actually much less in education or professional fields.
Oh, interesting. Much less.
Yeah. So they concluded it's important, definitely, but maybe not the sole or even primary driver of expert performance in all areas. They suggest other factors, including potentially heritable ones, play a significant role too.
Huh.
However, it's worth noting, one source, the Frontiers paper, argues that this meta-analysis might have used a broader definition of deliberate practice than Erickson originally intended. So the debate is kind of ongoing.
Okay, so the exact amount practice contributes might vary by field, and the definition itself is debated, but practice is definitely a key ingredient, maybe the key ingredient for skill building.
Crucial. Absolutely crucial. And it's not just about the sheer number of hours either. The sources suggest people like Sarah Chang, the violin prodigy, might not just practice more hours, but actually learn twice as fast. Their practice is incredibly efficient. And sticking with that kind of intense effort also requires what Angela Duckworth calls grit, that combination of passion and perseverance over the long haul. The Polgar example also implies you need a degree of inherent interest and capacity in the first place to sustain those hundreds or thousands of hours of dedicated work.
Right.
Those who do put in the hours are described in one source as a select breed, suggesting it takes a certain kind of person, perhaps someone predisposed to find that specific type of work rewarding, to actually stick with it.
So it's maybe not just practice, but the right kind of focused practice, undertaken by someone with the interest, the grit, and maybe the capacity to sustain it.
Exactly. It brings us right back to that interplay between innate factors and effortful development.
Okay. Beyond just perfecting skills, there's the fascinating realm of creativity. Is that something you're just born with, like a magical spark, or is it something you can actively cultivate? What do the sources say?
The sources are actually very positive here. Creativity is presented not as some fixed trait, but as an ability everyone possesses, and crucially, one that can be strengthened over time.
Really? Everyone?
That's the perspective offered. Jennifer Mueller is quoted suggesting it's highly sensitive to the environment. It can be shut off or turned on, depending on conditions. John Maida thinks it can be rekindled, noting that children are often naturally creative, but sometimes lose that spontaneous ability as they grow up.
Mm.
The goal for adult creativity, maybe, isn't just the wild divergence of a child, but the ability to both diverge, generate lots of ideas, and converge focus and refine to produce something meaningful.
So it's not some mystical thing only granted to a lucky few.
Definitely not presented that way. It's described more as not magic, but a skill, trainable through specific practices.
Like what? What kind of practices?
Things like consciously cultivating curiosity, making creativity a ritual or habit, not waiting for inspiration, just doing the work, actively combining disparate ideas from different fields, fostering environments that support experimentation, maybe with clear rules, but also rewards for trying new things, practicing mindfulness, and giving your creative efforts clear purpose seems important too.
Any specific tips from the sources on how someone listening might try to foster more creativity in their own life or work?
Yeah, some concrete things. Embrace curiosity, like Leonardo da Vinci dissecting bodies because he was curious about anatomy for his painting. Ritualized practice show up regularly. Combine ideas. Steve Jobs connecting that calligraphy class he took to computer fonts is a classic example. Foster supportive environments. And a powerful perspective shift mentioned is training yourself to see problems not as obstacles, but as opportunities for innovation. Instead of problems, we see potential, as one source puts it.
That idea of seeing problems as opportunities, that feels very actionable. And what are the benefits? Does being more creative actually help you?
The sources link creativity to better health and happiness, interestingly. When you engage in novel thinking and activities, you're literally laying down new neural pathways in your brain. That's neuroplasticity.
Ah, right.
So the more you flex that creative muscle, the stronger those pathways get, and the more creative you become over time. It sort of builds on itself.
Okay, a skill that feeds on itself. What other habits or approaches did the sources link specifically to highly creative people or geniuses?
A big one that comes up repeatedly is an intense lust for learning. Just this deep desire to know and understand. Queen Elizabeth I's rigorous classical education, Benjamin Franklin teaching himself languages and math on Sundays, Tesla reading voraciously by candlelight despite his father's disapproval, Einstein teaching himself calculus and forming his own little study group, the Olympia Academy.
That drive is really palpable in those examples. What else?
Intense concentration when they are working. Isaac Newton's manservant described him sometimes forgetting to eat because he was so absorbed in thought. John Maynard Keynes also commented on Newton's incredible power of focus. Mozart's concentration while composing is also noted.
But wait, didn't we just talk about the potential downside of being too focused or getting frozen into expertise, especially for prodigies? How does that square?
Ah, yes. Another interesting nuance from the sources. It seems while intense focus is key when you're deep in the work, many highly creative people also had diverse interests and hobbies completely outside their main domain.
Right.
Einstein played the violin and loved sailing. These varied experiences in different fields can actually spark new ideas when you combine them. It's that connecting things idea again. You might see a pattern in art that applies unexpectedly to science, or vice versa. It prevents you from getting stuck in one narrow mental channel.
So intense focus when needed, but also broad curiosity and experience. What about taking risks? Is that part of the profile?
Definitely seems to be. The sources point out that people who make major breakthroughs often take significant risks. Marie Curie leaving Poland with almost nothing to pursue science in Paris, Mao Zedong's audacious military strategies, Salman Rushdie publishing the Satanic Verses despite the danger, Jeff Bezos quitting his stable, high-paying job to start Amazon in his garage. Steve Jobs' famous line captures it, "You've got to be willing to crash and burn." Even smaller provocative risks, like Banksy's museum interventions, show a willingness to challenge norms.
Risk seems tied to doing something genuinely new. Is there also a routine aspect, though, paradoxically?
Often, yes. While spontaneity is part of creativity, having a regular time, place, and environment for focused work is very common. As the artist Chuck Close is quoted saying, "Inspiration is for amateurs, the rest of us just show up and get to work." Creating a structure can actually free up mental energy for the creative part.
Okay, that makes sense. Structure enabling freedom.
And sometimes the breakthroughs happen when you're not intensely focused at all. The sources highlight the surprising power of relaxation and mindless activity. Otto Loewy's Nobel-winning experiment design literally came to him in dreams 2 nights in a row.
Wow.
Beethoven apparently composed a musical canon while riding in a carriage. Toni Morrison got ideas while mowing the lawn. George Balanchine, the choreographer, while ironing. The advice seems to be, take walks, jog, daydream, nap, get on a train or in a car, allow your mind to wander. And like Einstein, maybe keep a notebook handy for when those ideas surface. Your brain is still working, connecting things in the background. It's about knowing when to step away from the focused effort.
That's a great counterpoint to the intense concentration, knowing when to let go and let the subconscious work. We touched on it earlier, but the sources emphasize the role of location too, like certain places foster creativity.
Historically, yes. Certain cities, Belle Epoque, Paris, mid-century New York, Silicon Valley today, have acted as powerful magnets. They draw diverse thinkers with dissimilar ideas together, creating this fertile ground where new combinations and insights can emerge. One source even refers to the H-1B visa, which brings skilled immigrants to the U.S. as the genius visa in this context.
Interesting. Finally, what about contrarian thinking? Seeing things differently.
That seems key. It's about spotting patterns others miss or questioning assumptions. Think of young Gauss instantly figuring out how to sum numbers from 1 to 100 by seeing them as pairs summing to 101, or Leonardo da Vinci's relentless curiosity about how things actually work, leading him to study anatomy so deeply just to paint better. It's not just accepting the obvious explanation, but digging deeper for the underlying structure or mechanism.
It sounds like genius often involves a willingness to ask fundamental questions and not accept the standard answers.
Exactly. Questioning the status quo seems vital.
Okay, let's tackle a more challenging topic that often comes up, and it's in our sources. The persistent mad genius trope. Is there actually a real link between exceptional creativity or genius and mental health struggles?
This is a really complex area the sources explore, and it's definitely debated heavily. The idea of the mad genius is deeply embedded in our culture, right? Think of lines from Alice in Wonderland about all the best people being mad, or quotes like Robin Williams about needing a little spot of madness.
And psychologists have looked into this scientifically.
Yes. Early figures like Cesare Lombroso back in the 19th century posited a link between heredity, mental disorder, and genius. More recently, studies by researchers like K. Redfield Jamison and Arnold Ludwig have found higher rates of mood disorders, psychosis, and even suicide attempts among artists and writers specifically compared to other professions or the general population.
Artists and writers,
Yep.
specifically.
Yes, particularly those groups. Poets, in particular, are highlighted in one source as having significantly elevated rates of various mental health pathologies compared to, say, scientists or politicians.
Examples like Van Gogh or John Nash often come up in these discussions, don't they?
They do, and the sources examine cases like theirs. Van Gogh's periods of intense creativity alongside his clear psychological distress and family history. John Nash, the mathematician whose profound creativity existed alongside his long struggle with schizophrenia.
Right.
One source, from Psychology Today, even discusses a hypothesis that maybe highly creative individuals carry only a part of the genetic predisposition linked to conditions like schizophrenia enough to potentially boost divergent thinking or unique perspectives, but not enough to trigger the full-blown illness in most cases.
Speculative, but interesting. It sounds like there's a statistical correlation observed, particularly in certain creative fields, though the why is obviously very complex and not fully understood. Does this potential link have implications for treatment?
It does raise challenges. The sources mention that while treatments like lithium or anticonvulsants are often effective for mood disorders, they can sometimes dampen intellectual intensity or the full range of emotional experience. And this can be a real problem for some creative patients who feel these treatments interfere with their very ability to think or feel in the ways that fuel their work. This sometimes leads them, unfortunately, to stop taking medication that could be very helpful otherwise.
Is intelligence itself a factor when we talk about these potential links?
Yes, interestingly, one source notes that high intelligence can actually be a protective factor for individuals who might be genetically predisposed to conditions like schizophrenia. It can help them function at a higher level despite the underlying vulnerability, as was arguably seen in John Nash's case.
Okay. Let's circle back briefly to child prodigies and savants. We defined them earlier. Are there particular challenges or pitfalls mentioned in the sources that might prevent a prodigy, specifically, from becoming a truly transformative genius later in life?
The sources make a really interesting observation here. Most people we generally recognize as geniuses throughout history were not child prodigies. And, conversely, most child prodigies do not go on to become transformative geniuses who revolutionize their fields. Picasso is often presented as a notable exception to this general pattern.
Really? Most prodigies don't become geniuses. Why might that be the case? What happens?
One powerful idea suggested in the material is that prodigies can become, in a sense, frozen into expertise. Their early fame and reinforcement comes from demonstrating exceptional mastery of existing skills, playing classical music perfectly, painting realistically, solving known types of math problems very quickly.
Right, they master the rules early.
Exactly. And this early success, the praise, the public identity built around that mastery, can make it incredibly difficult for them later on to take the necessary creative risks, the kind of crashing and burning Steve Jobs talked about that's often required to break new ground and make truly novel contributions. They are rewarded for mastering the known, and it becomes very hard psychologically to step off that pedestal into the completely unknown territory of creation.
That's a really counterintuitive idea that achieving expertise so early could actually become a barrier to later, more profound innovation.
It's a fascinating point raised by the sources, yeah. There's also mention of a potential dark side for some highly talented children, maybe in that 140, 150 IQ range. Their advanced ability can make them acutely aware of the potential for failure, how far they could fall, which can sometimes lead to a kind of emotional paralysis or a deep fear of taking risks.
And for savants, just to close that loop, despite the potential developmental challenges they face, is cultivating their unique, narrow skills still seen as beneficial for them?
Oh, absolutely. The sources emphasize that for individuals with savant syndrome, developing and utilizing their extraordinary skills is really important for their overall intellectual growth and, importantly, their social development and integration, too. Kim Peek's later life, where he became more communicative and engaged through sharing his abilities, is a key example here.
Okay. This whole journey through potential, practice, creativity, and pitfalls brings us to another crucial concept discussed in our sources: mindset. How does your fundamental belief about your own abilities influence your potential and your path?
The sources highlight the work of Carol Dweck here, focusing on the critical difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset.
Okay.
A fixed mindset is essentially the belief that your abilities, your intelligence, your skills are pretty much innate and static.
Hmm.
You've got a certain amount and that's it. You're either smart or you're not, good at art or you're not.
And a growth mindset is the opposite, believing you can change.
Exactly. A growth mindset is the belief that your abilities, intelligence, and skills aren't fixed, but can be developed and improved through dedication, hard work, learning from mistakes, and persistence. Effort is key.
And how does just believing that actually change things? What's the impact?
Well, according to the sources, individuals with a growth mindset are much better equipped to embrace challenges. They tend to see failures not as proof of their inadequacy, but as learning opportunities. They value effort itself, and they're much more open to feedback because they genuinely believe they can improve.
Uh-huh.
They understand that effort isn't just something you do if you lack natural talent. Effort is actually what builds talent and ability over time.
That sounds incredibly powerful, not just for individuals maybe, but for groups or teams too.
Yes, absolutely. The sources suggest that fostering a growth mindset culture within teams or organizations involves things like presenting skills as acquirable by anyone willing to learn, valuing passion, effort, and continuous improvement over simply celebrating innate talent, and having leaders or mentors who focus on developing potential rather than just judging current ability. It creates an environment where people feel safe free to learn, experiment, stretch themselves, and ultimately grow.
Okay, let's try and pull all these fascinating threads together for you, our listener.
Right.
We've covered a huge amount of ground today, digging through this stack of sources.
We really have. And I think the clearest takeaway is that what we call exceptional ability, whether it's talent, a child prodigy's early spark, a savant's unique skill, or the truly transformative impact of a genius, is clearly not just one simple thing. It's definitely not solely about being born with a super high IQ or some mythical genius gene.
No, it seems to be this incredibly complex tapestry, doesn't it? You might have some genetic potential that sets a sort of blueprint, perhaps.
A predisposition.
But your environment, your family, your upbringing, your education, your experiences, your culture, even where you happen to live profoundly, shapes how, or even if, that blueprint gets expressed.
And then deliberate practice, sustained effort, sheer persistence, grit. Those are absolutely essential for building the skills and mastering the domains needed for high achievement. And your interests, what you're passionate about, and your fundamental belief about your ability, your mindset, those fuel the effort and determine how you approach inevitable challenges.
Right. And we saw how diverse experiences, intense curiosity, taking risks, and even those moments of unexpected connection or analogy can spark creativity. Specific habits, too, ranging from intense focus at times
To knowing when to step back and let your mind wander.
seem to support the work. And
Yeah.
yes, location, maybe a bit of luck or chance, they all seem to play a role in this mix.
So for you listening, whether you're trying to learn a new skill, tackle a difficult problem at work, or just aiming to be more creative in your life, the insights from these sources suggest focusing on things you can influence, like cultivating your curiosity, embracing challenges rather than shying away from them, really internalizing that effort, builds ability over time, being mindful of the kind of environment that supports your learning and work, and maybe even consciously scheduling some time for your mind to just wander and make those unexpected connections.
It's about seeing potential and development as dynamic, influenced by this whole ecosystem of factors, many of which you can actively shape or choose to engage with.
It paints a far richer and maybe more hopeful picture than just relying on innate ability alone.
This deep dive has truly illuminated just how many different ingredients seem to go into the recipe for what we perceive as exceptional human ability.
It's fascinating.
From the earliest whispers of genetic potential and environmental shaping, to the relentless grind of deliberate practice, the critical lens of mindset, the spark of curiosity, the courage to take risks, the power of diverse experiences, the influence of location, and even the surprising value of, well, a messy desk or a good nap.
It really makes you rethink the whole idea of natural talent, doesn't it? What that even means.
It really does. And it leaves me, and hopefully you, with this thought kind of building on everything we've explored today from these sources. If genius and creativity are truly the result of such a vast and varied combination of factors, from our DNA and our upbringing to our effort, our curiosity, the people we meet, the risks we take, the places we live, and even the quiet moments when our brain is just doing its own background processing, Well, how much untapped potential for truly exceptional ability might be lying dormant within all of us, simply waiting for the right environment, the right kind of effort, and perhaps, just as Alexander Fleming suggested, a little bit of opportune chance?
That is a provocative question to end on. A lot to think about there.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.